Today we welcome Khalil Islam. 30 years ago, Mr. Islam was known as Thomas 15X Johnson. Mr. Johnson was one of 3 men convicted of the assassination of Malcolm X, sentenced to 25 years in prison. Mr. Islam was paroled after serving 22 years for the murder. He has steadfastly maintained his innocence. Meet Les Payne, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and assistant managing editor of New York Newsday. He is currently writing a biography on Malcolm X that is due out this fall. Manning Marable is a professor of history and political science and the director of the Institute for Research in African American Studies at Columbia University. Sam Hammoud is the former director of the Islamic Center in Washington, D.C. His father was instrumental in teaching Elijah Muhammad the rudiments of Islam. Meet George Curry, editor-in-chief of Emerge magazine and the author of Emerge magazine's current special report of the final days of Malcolm X. And meet Dr. Abdul Alim Muhammad, national spokesperson for the Nation of Islam. Gentlemen, welcome all of you to the show. Who killed Malcolm X?
I think that's the question that none of us can actually answer. That is precisely the reason that this past Tuesday, the Honorable Louis Farrakhan is calling for a class action suit. The answer to that question is hidden in secret government files. And this American people, these black people who have been deprived of leadership for so many decades, we demand that the light of truth be shown on the secrets that are hidden in government files so that we can answer that question once and for all: who killed Malcolm X, who killed Martin Luther King, and even who killed John F. Kennedy.
Or Robert Kennedy, for that matter, George?
There are some things we can say, though. And we can say that the FBI conducted extensive spying on the Nation of Islam, on Malcolm X, telephone conversation, infiltrating each organization at its highest level. We can say that. We can also say Gene Roberts, the person who's pitching that famous picture, giving Malcolm X the mouth resuscitation, was an undercover New York City cop. And not only that, he told us, and we reported this in Emerge magazine, that a week before he saw a dry run, the assassination of Malcolm X, that he reported that to the New York City Police Department. They said they would pass it on. They did nothing. And when the assassination went down, it went down exactly the way he saw it.
But wait a minute, George. You said he reported to you that he saw a dry run. Who was doing the dry run?
Now, that is open to dispute. He didn't know the people who were doing the dry run, but he did let the police department know. And there's no doubt, even though the documents that are available, that they knew that this was going to happen.
But what was he doing when he saw this? Was he a part of the group?
He was one of Malcolm's bodyguards. And he was, in fact, rotated off the detail right before
No, I mean, when he saw this dry run.
It was at the Audubon a week before when Malcolm was giving a speech, and he saw what he said was a dry run on assassination, that he reported to the police, and they did nothing.
Why didn't he tell Malcolm?
Because he thought his cover would be blown as an infiltrator.
Manny? I can see you shaking your head. By the way, everyone can just jump in.
I think that the real question here is how Malcolm X was a part of a whole tradition of African American leadership that has been under attack, one could argue, since 1619.
Still continuing to be under attack?
It still continues. We see a systematic pattern of surveillance, harassment, intimidation of African American leadership, especially those women and men who try authentically to represent the interests and advocate the programs that directly benefit the African American community. The FBI has over 50,000 pages of documents, only a fraction of which, 2,500 pages or so, on Malcolm X are available to scholars. Now, I've been at work for the last several years on a biography of Malcolm X as well, and the thing that has struck me the most is that as Malcolm developed politically and moved to an international stage and began to challenge the United States, he was the first person to speak out effectively, American leader, against the war in Vietnam, to internationalize the African American liberation struggle, when you take those kinds of positions, as Martin did, interestingly enough, at the end of his life, then you become a threat to the state and other kinds of interests. And unfortunately, that's what we're seeing.
I've listened to you, and I'll get right to you, Les. I've listened to you. There seems to be a suggestion, gentlemen, just listening, that is, that the FBI may have been involved in the assassination. Was there a climate that the FBI fostered so that the assassination could take place?
They bragged about it. The Chicago office bragged about it.
There's another aspect, I think, that Manning touched on that's very important, and that's the international aspect. You see, he was very close to Nasser. The people who arranged for Malik al-Shabaz's trip to Mecca were Dr. Shawarabi and Dr. Haballah.
Tell us who they were.
Well, Dr. Haballah was the first director of the Islamic Center in Washington, D.C. His name is never mentioned in histories of Malcolm X. But Haballah was very close to Malcolm, and he knew Elijah Muhammad. He also helped take Warith ad-Din and others to Islam.
So what are you suggesting? Are you suggesting that because of his international attachments, because of where he was going in terms of his leadership internationally,
correct,
that he became even a bigger threat to the FBI?
That's correct, because you see, Nasser and others would have helped him at the UN bring up the problem of African Americans in America.
Les?
So he was moving in a direction that was making the national government here very uncomfortable.
Another thing we can say in terms of moving closer to the Horn and also taking advantage of the fact that we have one of the men who served 22 years after being convicted, and that is that we can also say that there were 3 gunmen, and there were 3 guns. There was a shotgun, there was a 9mm, and there was a .45. Thomas Hare, who went to trial, essentially said that the other 2 men were not involved. Khalil Islam, who we have here, is one of those men whom he said during the trial was not, in fact, involved. So the question is, and I think at least the journalistic community that is interested, which is a very narrow community, or the reading public that is interested, which is also narrow, have come to the assumption that 2 of the 3 people on the trigger were not, in fact, in the ballroom that day. And so the question is, well, who were on the triggers?
Who do you think, Les? Who do you think was the mastermind behind the killing of Malcolm X?
Well, there's 2 questions. I mean, if you're talking about the mastermind or the person on the trigger. In other words, we have 2 triggers that are presently unoccupied.
Give me the answer to both, my friend.
Well, I think as a journalist, I need to know who was on the trigger before I can know who was his mastermind.
Do you know?
I have some pretty good ideas.
Are you willing to before we move along, my friend, you've been investigating it. You're writing about it. Who was on the trigger?
Well, I mean, Spike Lee's movie, Zach Condo's book particularly, I think, who named 5 men, 4 other men who were involved, I think is a pretty not only plausible but a likely list of people who were in fact involved.
Khalil, we're talking all around you. We don't want to do that.
I'm listening. What he's saying is true when it comes to the 4 individuals. The affidavit was put in by William Kunstler in my behalf. As close as I've gotten to that, it was, we had a brother named Imam Faiz, and he went to New Jersey to investigate, and he found out that these people indeed existed, and their whole history was just like Mujahid ran it down to us.
All right, let's clear this up for our audience. Were you involved in the assassination of Malcolm X?
No, I wasn't.
How did you get shot?
I didn't get shot.
You did not get shot?
No, ma'am.
Were you involved around it, over it, under it? Then how did you get arrested?
I couldn't even walk. I was involved in an incident in the Bronx where a correction officer was shot named Benjamin Brown. And when that happened, one of Malcolm's close associates, and I want everybody to listen to this very carefully because it came out just exactly like I'm telling you. This is a coincidence. He got on TV and he said, you see what Thomas 15X did and Norman Butler? He said, those guys, man, he says, they're going to get all of us hypocrites. They're going to get me, they're going to get Malcolm, and it happened just like that.
So you were set up to take the fall, you think?
Behind that incident in the Bronx. And what the man said on national TV, and by the way, Malcolm was assassinated, I was in the tombs, and I was told through one of the correctional officers, you got a problem. I said, what kind of problem I got? He said, they found Leon dead in Boston. I said, he said, you know what he said in Newsweek? I said, yeah.
Tell us who, remind the audience who Leon was.
Well, Leon Almir was the karate instructor for the FOI. And that's why it led, they believed that he was telling the truth. And they said that, all right, so the DA said, I found out later on, so what these guys think, they're a black mafia, so we're going to make sure that they don't never see daylight anymore.
Khalil, who do you think killed Malcolm?
Well, I would say that the individual that was shot on the scene, Mujahid, he told me himself that the 4 individuals that he gave up, he says we went there and we rehearsed it just like somebody just said. We rehearsed it, and we came back the next week and we carried out the operation. He said he was very sorry that he destroyed my family and my business and whatnot, and this is the reason why he confided in me. For some reason, he just felt my spirit and we just locked together. And he ran the whole thing down to me. I said, well, listen, you should have never took the stand. You're not going to give up names. The DA is not going to let anybody go. You have to give up names.
So you felt that the moment you were arrested that there was no hope for you to get justice?
None whatsoever. I even stated that before when I was on trial. I told my co-defendant, I said, listen, I said, we're going to take a long trip. The only way we're going to get out is through the back door. It was sealed. I knew it was sealed. I had a lot of experience with, you know, street life and prison and stuff like that.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation. Dr. Aleem, does that mean that the Nation of Islam is hinting that it took some responsibility in disciplining Malcolm?
No, it means that the Nation of Islam, if we had done that, we would not be pussyfooting around and denying it. We would tell you straight out that we did it. But in fact, we didn't do it. Probably what saved Malcolm's life was that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad told the FOI, leave him alone. And I just reiterate Minister Farrakhan's point made earlier this week, that the truth about Malcolm X's assassination will only be known when the secret files that are held by the American government are opened up to public scrutiny. Now, a man that feels guilty is not asking for all of the facts to be brought out into the open. But someone killed Malcolm, and justice demands that their identity be known. Someone killed Martin Luther King, and justice demands that their identity be known.
But realistically, someone killed John Kennedy, and those files are closed for how long, gentlemen?
Well, then, see, we are a government, so they tell us now, of, for, and by the people. So now, who is it in the government that has the right to say to the American people that you cannot know these secrets? Only we know, when we realize those secrets only protect the guilty.
But I do, you know, I think we're in the right direction. I just need to interrupt him at that point. See, right now, we just formed a committee.
Who are the we?
We, me, and Bilal Family Production, and Daoud, the people that I came from New York with. And the Committee is for Human Justice. And what I'm doing there is I'm demanding the exoneration, complete exoneration of myself, which is Khalil Islam. And I think we're getting close to what he's saying, which is true, governmental influence. But there's a movie out, a documentary, and I would like to suggest that everybody go see this documentary called Brother Minister.
Brother Minister?
Yeah, Assassination of Muslim Man. And in that particular documentary, we have people that are testifying and giving new evidence and pointing in the right direction.
These are people that the Justice Department, the FBI did not talk to? Or some were talked to, but their testimony, where did these people come from?
Some they did not talk to, like Benjamin 2X Kareem, for instance. They didn't call him to testify.
Did he come forward and say, I have information?
No, he was threatened. There was a lot of people that was threatened.
Threatened by who? And who was he that he would be threatened?
They were threatened by people who didn't want anybody to interfere with the structure the way they had set it up. In other words,
but here's what I have a problem with. When you say they, when you say people, tell me who.
All right, I'm going to tell you who.
That's what I want you to do.
I was used as a scapegoat.
By who?
By who? New York City Police Department, the DA, FBI.
Who was the DA at the time?
Dermody.
Okay. Did the nation use you as a scapegoat?
Goes both ways.
So is that a yes?
That's a yes.
So you feel that everyone used you as a scapegoat?
Exactly. And the film, the documentary I'm telling you about now, will depict that. Will show very unique movement and activity that was going on at that particular time.
Within the nation and outside of the nation.
Right, that's correct.
I think it's hard to do, too, is to go back through the years, and some of us have gone back and look at it because there's so much you forget over that time. And I interviewed Minister Farrakhan 5 years ago, and he said he regretted that he did help create the atmosphere for that. If you go back to the Muhammad speaks during those times, it was extreme language. So and the way he explained it to me was, look, I had to choose between my teacher, Elijah Muhammad,
And Malcolm
or
X.
Malcolm X, and I went with my teacher.
May I interject something else that's being forgotten about, and it has been forgotten about in almost all the discussions, not just here but elsewhere. Elijah Muhammad himself was not a very violent man. He was a very peaceful man, he was a very religious man, and he was a seeker. So that the portrayal, you see, everyone's focusing on Minister Farrakhan, but the real leader still was Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and he would never have asked for, I agree with Dr. Muhammad, he wouldn't have asked for Malcolm's death because that wasn't his way of dealing with problems. He always tried to find solutions to problems.
But also, he loved Malcolm, didn't he?
That's right, he did. And this is one of the things that people don't understand. Even when it came time for Jamil Diab and Haballah...
Tell us who they are, because the audience
Jamil
may not...
Diab was a Palestinian who was in Chicago, very active in Islam in the 50s and 60s, who had a PhD in spiritual science. And he was training many of the Muslims in Chicago in Arabic and Islam. And Elijah allowed the people to go learn from Jamil Diab. And Jamil then helped to train Wallace Muhammad and Akbar Muhammad with their father's consent. Elijah Muhammad did not hold them back.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to get at is very important, though, is that we don't understand, people are not talking about the real chemistry of the nation of
Or the
Islam under
climate.
Elijah Muhammad.
But here's
that was
what they
very
are
peaceful
talking about,
in a way.
gentlemen. They are talking about the fact that the wife of the slain leader, Malcolm X, has accused and has not bitten her tongue, has said that not only did the Nation of Islam kill her husband, but that they bragged about it. How do you respond to Dr. Shabazz?
Well, I think you have to remember that that film clip you just showed, by the way, was shown to her. This was taped last around Savior's Day, which is to say around February, March, or February of 1994, right? And she was shown that clip on the Gay Pressman show in New York, and then right after that asked.
Made that statement?
Yeah.
But
now, she
are
had
you
over the
suggesting
years,
that she didn't believe that up until that clip
No,
was
she
shown?
had said it up until that time. But it appeared that at this particular time, she said it stronger than she had previously. But again, I'm just trying to put it in perspective in terms of how that came out.
We are bordering on the ridiculous here. Do you mean to tell me that 30 years ago, that if the FBI or any other law enforcement agency had evidence that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, one of the most hated black men in America, had been involved in a murder plot, that they would not have indicted him? And do you want us to believe that 30 years later, if this present FBI and other law enforcement agencies in America had any evidence whatsoever that Minister Farrakhan was involved in a murder plot, that they would not indict him?
Yeah.
I mean, let's not be ridiculous.
That's why I was indicted. That's why I was convicted. That's what they was trying to do. And they thought that when they convicted me, that they was going to be able to reach on Elijah Muhammad.
But what's stand this? Betty Shabazz, Dr. Shabazz, was on the inside of the movement because of the nature of her husband.
Well,
she was privy to a lot of things.
Let me interrupt you. One thing that's not understood about Malcolm's life at that time, nor any Muslim leader's life at that time, they rarely discussed things on a day-to-day basis with their wives. They were too busy with what they were doing. It was a very patriarchal society, and he was very much out there. And this, I know this with my father, I know it with all the other Muslim leaders, they were out there doing things, they weren't explaining it to their wives.
So
or
you're
to their
saying she
families.
did not know the intricacies?
She couldn't know everything because he wasn't there enough.
There's a piece of evidence that could be brought forth that has not been made public.
And what is that?
That is that Betty Shabazz has never released the names that Malcolm, that last speech was supposed to name a so-called hit team that was supposed to come to get him. And we asked her, Emerge asked her whether she would ever make that list public. She said no. We talked to Gordon Parks just a few days ago. Gordon Parks said the night that
Gordon Parks, the photographer,
the famous
the
photographer,
author.
said the night that Malcolm was assassinated, he saw the list. He said the list was in blood, and he wrote down the names. Had started to run them in Life magazine, but decided not to. This was just a few days
but
ago.
What I don't understand is, if the controversy is at a peak as it is right now, George, and if Dr. Shabazz has the names, and if Gordon Parks, who is very much alive,
Yes.
has the names, and if he saw them and remembered, because Gordon Parks has an
He wrote
excellent
them down.
name. He wrote them down. Why not bring them forth now?
I think that's important to have. I think that's.
Did you ask him that? Did Emerge ask him?
Oh, we most certainly did. We got nowhere.
Why? Is he afraid?
he said he didn't want to cause any more bloodshed.
But wait a minute. The real deal, straight up. Is he afraid
I
Is there a
can't I
real
can't say what's in
fear
his
in
mind. I
telling
can
the
tell you
truth?
what he said. He said that he would not release the name. He will not release
Well,
the name.
if he in fact has
Have an official hearing, a court of law, a legally constituted judicial body to review what the evidence is.
But aren't we going to have
This is supposed to be a nation of law. So then let law prevail. Not gossip, not innuendo, not hearsay, not this, that, or
But
the other.
we're all looking at you with a smile over that phrase, aren't we, audience? They are supposed to be a nation of law, because you're suggesting that the law keepers were involved in breaking the law, and more than that, taking the life of someone.
I'm saying ultimately, as we are taught, the authority in this country resides with we, the people. So we as black people have been deprived of our human rights since we were brought here. We want to open the case of every slain black leader that has ever been taken from us and the guilty parties exposed. And that includes Malcolm X, but it's not exclusive to Malcolm X. All of those that we know that we lost as a result of this kind of activity.
I'm smiling. Gentlemen, you know why. That cry has been made before. I like your optimism, though. Hello.
Yes, I have a message for Brother Khalid. Brother Khalid, I saw the movie Brother Minister, and I'd just like to know, who is the Illuminati corporation that had to do with producing the movie?
Well, see, the Illuminati didn't have anything to do with
But who are
producing
they?
the movie. The Illuminati is, from what I can understand, they're a national, international group that's tied in with the money people of this world. The big bankers.
That was used
You don't have a mic.
excuse me, that was used as a credit on that film. Were you aware of that?
Yeah, I know. He used that name. The individual that produced that film, we even questioned him about that, because I did a lot of research on the Illuminati, and I understand who the Illuminati is. For some reason or another, man, he was attracted to that title. I don't know if it's somebody who's influencing him or what.
All right,
But
we have to understand the importance of that, but I just want to get back to Dr. Shabazz, and I will do that right after these messages. Who killed Malcolm X? Dr. Muhammad, if I can just lean on you for a moment. You saw that statement made by the late Honorable Elijah Muhammad. What did he mean by that?
Well, assuming that that's an accurate quote of what he said, the scripture teaches us that he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. Those who become registered members of the Nation of Islam lay down all weapons. We are disarmed by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and now by the Honorable Louis Farrakhan. So we carry no weapons to wage our struggle for justice. When Malcolm left the Nation of Islam, he no longer adhered to that principle of nonviolence, and he picked up weapons, and he said that he would use them. He made speeches, that seemed to indicate his willingness to resort to violence to achieve his ends. So perhaps that would be an interpretation of that statement.
I strongly disagree with that interpretation. I would argue that there were clear differences politically and ideologically within the black nationalist movement between the Nation of Islam and Malcolm X. But differences of political philosophy do not translate into
Murder.
responsibility for murder. And the key thing that we have to keep emphasizing here is that the counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, existed during this period, that you have to ask yourself who really benefited from the murder of Malcolm X
Then let's ask that
and
question.
the murder of Martin King.
Who really benefited by Malcolm's X? And what evidence do we have, journalists, people who have authored books, that there was this clear-cut effort to kill Malcolm? Who stood to benefit from it?
Well, certainly you can say the establishment in a sense that another thing.
What establishment? I want names.
I'll give you some names when I
Good,
want to pull it
George.
together. You got to realize that at the point that Malcolm X was assassinated, and the point he and Dr. King were going toward each other. You remember initially Dr. King was denouncing the Black Power movement. Then he said later on, well, that's an okay term if it inspires pride. And they actually had met one time on the Capitol. They were moving toward each other. And if they had ever hooked it up, which I believe the direction they were going in, that'd been a powerful combination.
Okay, but before I go to the audience, let me just ask this question. When we ask who stood to benefit, didn't the Honorable Elijah Muhammad stand to benefit? Wasn't there some concern among the brethren at that time that Malcolm had grown bigger than life, maybe bigger than the messenger himself,
True.
and had more influence and was bringing more people into the nation?
That's one of the reasons.
Well,
That's one of the reasons for
That's
what?
one of the reasons why he was assassinated. people thought he was becoming too popular and that he could out-talk Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm, I don't know any commentary that could deal with him. We used to put Malcolm on the radio and everybody in the house better shut up because when he handled a situation, man, it was handled. And that, see, and people started inflaming not only the Nation of Islam, the fruit, but you had him talking about cops, the graft, you had him talking about drugs, you had about numbers, prostitution.
So his enemies were everywhere.
His enemies were everywhere, and they saw an opportunity to take advantage of a situation, and that's why I did 22 years in jail.
Okay.
But the logic just isn't there because after Malcolm was gone, then the Honorable Elijah Muhammad replaced him with an even more eloquent spokesman. So that logic just doesn't hold. The people who benefit from the disunity,
and that even more eloquent in your words was Louis Farrakhan.
Yeah. And the people who benefit, to get back to your root question, the people who benefit from the assassination of black leaders is white America. As long as they can deprive the mass of our people of effective leadership, then they can continue to hold the masses in confusion and oppression. And that is why today, when Malcolm is, wait, brother, because that's now that Malcolm is gone, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is gone, the #1 target of assassination today is Minister Louis Farrakhan.
Okay, but I have a question, and I'm going to get to your question, okay? But they keep saying things that make me want to come right back. You said that an even more eloquent orator than Malcolm was replaced, and that was in the present Minister Louis Farrakhan. Rumor has it that that was where the real bone of contention was, that Minister Farrakhan was upset with the position that Malcolm had, that both of these men were, I'm giving you gossip, you're going to give me truth, but I'm giving you what was said. And you all can join in if you've heard what I'm getting ready to say. That these two men were vying for favoritism and that Elijah Muhammad favored Malcolm, which set up the discontent between Minister Farrakhan and Malcolm X. You've heard this before. This is not new.
Well, we've heard all of these lies before. The repetition of a lie doesn't make it true. The reality of it is that Minister Farrakhan at that time, Louis X, was a student of Malcolm X. He was his understudy, if you will. He looked to Malcolm with great respect and admiration. He was his big brother. He was almost his alter ego. But when Malcolm distanced himself from the leader, Minister Farrakhan at that time, along with millions upon other followers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, distanced themselves from Malcolm. Not because they disliked Malcolm as a person, but because organizational unity is more important than any single personality, no matter how charismatic.
George, who was Baba Kanda? Is that his name? And what did he say about this issue? Baba Kondo and his book? Yes.
You talking about Zach?
Yes.
Zach Kondo.
Okay.
He says that there's, it was not, you're putting a spin on it that I don't agree with. In the sense that it was not this contention between Farrakhan and Malcolm. That simply was not true.
Okay.
Although.
So that is a plot by the media to create that image?
You look at it now, it's looking at it and not going back in history. I mean, Minister Farrakhan served under Malcolm in Boston. I mean, they were both, Minister Farrakhan said to me in an interview, he was like my big brother. He was a big brother I never had. They were close. He did say a lot of inflammatory things after, but it was never Malcolm against Farrakhan as such. That is not
That's what Dr. Farrakhan, Minister Farrakhan told me. But then what did he kind of say in his book?
Well, he said a lot of things. He said the nation and the FBI were equally guilty.
He points the finger at both.
At both of them, yes.
He points the finger at
both. When you do this, you can get it in one compact form if you just read Carl Evans' book, The Judas Factor. And you'll see all the reasons why we say certain elements of this government and other forces, why it was necessary to eliminate them too. I think there was a very, very good illustration in that book. And if everybody was to read that book...
Well, tell us.
Well, like somebody said, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X got together. They had a meeting. And
they came out as brothers after that meeting.
Well, they came out as brothers, and they said they were going to do everything to unify their forces. And Dr. Martin Luther King also went and saw Elijah Muhammad, and he told the public, I went to the mountain, I saw the other side. That's a threat. The government does not want us united. And what they were trying to do then, they were using a master scheme, because J. Edgar Hoover said, we cannot allow a black messiah to rise up.
That's right.
And that's what they represented. It's very easy for you to see. And like I said, in one compact form, from cover to cover, you read that book, you get all the facts.
Then that is my concern about the current controversy with the daughter of Malcolm and Louis Farrakhan now.
Just like
That's not the controversy.
She's a victim just
the
like I.
current controversy is, if you go back 10 years ago, when the Honorable Louis Farrakhan and Jesse Louis Jackson joined forces, that was a threat that could not be tolerated, and so things were done to split that unity up.
Jesse was discredited in the media.
The Minister Farrakhan with the Congressional Black Caucus, the NAACP coming together, convening a leadership summit, that is the issue. We must break that unity. And so that is why Minister Farrakhan today is the target for assassination, not necessarily by Malcolm's daughter, but from the government, because here is a man who has such an attractive personality to so many different groups and different constituencies that he has the real potential of uniting a nation of people.
So are you suggesting then, and let's get right to it,
yes.
And believe me, I'm going to let you ask your question. I keep telling you that I have to come close for this. Are you then suggesting that this whole thing between the daughter of Malcolm and Farrakhan is an attempt by them, whoever they are, to actually kill Minister Farrakhan?
Of course, to create the atmosphere in which his own people would acquiesce if somebody did something to him, and they would say he got what he deserved. And they are more than frightened a little bit at the prospect of this October, Minister Farrakhan leading 1 million serious black men into Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, to shut it down until we as a people receive justice.
Last summer,
this brother needs justice.
I said that woman, Calvera, thank you very much, thank you. I said that she is a victim the same way that I was.
Okay.
Inside people, listen, a man came from Chicago and approached me and showed me 9 different reasons I was sent to tell y'all why you must cut that man down. The same thing has happened with Kabila. With this Asian, he's been an Asian for over 15 years, maybe 20 years.
That's right.
This is a concocted plot
Remember what happened?
to send you into the opposite direction while they do their dirty work.
Remember what happened last summer when you had the 3 of us, as well as other African-American leaders,
Including Betty Shabazz.
Betty Shabazz and Minister Farrakhan was on one side of me and on the other. And we were all in the same room together. And think about how far we've moved away from black solidarity. If there is anything that challenges the power in this system, it is the power of black people coming together around a progressive agenda. And that is what the state is afraid of.
Well, we have dozens of questions, and I promise this gentleman he will get his on first, right after these messages. This gentleman has graciously given me permission to ask this question of the panel. All through our program, you've been saying them, they. All right. The anti-abortionists, they have a list. Everyone who works in a clinic, they know where they live, where they go, who they are, and they release the names to all their membership, and they call them on the phone, and you know what they do. If you know who they are, gentlemen, if this is a threat to the nation and your leader, where's your hit list? Why don't you get after them like they are allegedly getting after you?
We've got to get after them because we need to understand that the they are the people with the power in this country. We need to ask the question, what is the Justice Department of Clinton's administration doing when Clinton would not be in the White House today without the votes of African American people? What is Janet Reno's responsibility, and what is going on in the Minneapolis office when the they is a prosecutor that uses someone who's been a paid federal informant and has a tawdry
But
history
Manny,
of
I
lying
mean
on the
even
left.
more straight up than that.
Hey.
During the assassination of Malcolm X and all of the books that you all are involved in, you know who they are, you know the names. Where are the names? I've been trying to get you to give me one name in this hour program. Name them. If you accuse them, name them. And if something happens to you, we know where to go. Your question.
Yes, I'd like to preface my question by first stating that we've talked about Malcolm X, but But what we miss is that Malcolm was a person who stood up for justice. If Malcolm were here today, in the circumstances of a gentleman or any one of us spending 22 years in jail for a crime that we were accused of and were innocent, I think Malcolm, and the person that he would have stood up immediately and supported that person and saw to it that justice was done.
So what are you saying?
I'm saying that all of us who love Malcolm, all of us who say that we support the justice, we should stand up on the principle of asking the government to reopen the case of Malcolm. We
should go to them.
We should go to them in order to seek exoneration for the two people that were convicted of that crime that were innocent.
I talked to Dr. Mahalo a while ago. I think we ought to ask the Congressional Black Caucus, because a lot of the federal government has no credibility. We ought to ask the Congressional Black Caucus to open an investigation themselves.
Why haven't they done that?
Well, we're asking right now. That's the challenge.
That's where we're going. That's where we're going.
Okay, now wait a minute. Then am I to understand that immediately after this program, those of you that I am looking at will join together and go to those people who represent us on the Hill with Pharaoh, and you will ask them, why won't you react? Is that what you're going to do?
I'm going to take the program.
Would you do that?
Yes, absolutely.
And would you let us know what their response is?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, Sister Beth, I'd like to just say I'm the General Counsel for the Nation of Islam, and along with myself and our co-counsel in Chicago, the Nation of Islam, let us be reminded, filed a $4.4 billion defamation action against the New York Post for their malicious perversion of the statements of Dr. Betty Shabazz. Dr. Betty Shabazz never said that Minister Farrakhan killed her husband. And in fact about it, when I was in New York and we filed the lawsuit, that very day after the lawsuit was filed, Dr. Shabazz was on television and they asked her, are you saying that Minister Farrakhan killed Malcolm? She said, no, I did not say that.
Then is she going to sue the newspaper for misquoting her?
No, we're suing the newspaper because the newspaper's attack is against Minister Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam.
But if they misquoted her and created the confusion, shouldn't she be enjoined in your lawsuit?
Well, that's between her and her counsel. But as far as the Nation of Islam is concerned, we have filed an action to protect the good name of Minister Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. Finally, I want to say this. It's been nearly a year since the action was filed. The government has admitted in discovery documents that they have certain governmental information relative to the assassination of Malcolm X, and in their discovery documents they said we're not going to give them to you. And so this shows us clearly that the government was involved, and so the public needs to be
Under
aware of this.
freedom of information, can't you get that information?
The government, they're saying no. This is the whole point. And so we're in court right now arguing with the New York Supreme Court over this very point. So this should be proof enough of the hand of the government of America in this. And if we want to know who's doing it, it is the rich and powerful of America, the oligarchy, the small crooks.
I want a name.
There are many groups, ma'am. You know,
Well, give me one name.
Government, the American government.
Say, Beverly, let me add this. We're like people on the ground. Beverly, let me give this analogy. We're like people on the ground, and the government is like someone in a jet plane going 700 miles an hour with the rockets. We can't see beyond that shield because they're going so fast, and they have such a dark shield there, and we're on the ground. That's what you have to understand.
But
that's what we can't find
quickly
always.
Before I run out of time, it says, and I'm probably being extremely naive, but you joined me a little earlier in that naivete, we the people. That means that whoever they are work for us.
That's right. So we, the 1 million black men or more who march on Washington for justice, we're saying Betty Shabazz deserves to know who killed her husband. The people deserve to know who killed Malcolm. The people deserve to know who killed King. The people deserve to know who killed Kennedy. The American people, black people included, need to have control of their government. And we need to know the identities. You're asking the question, who are these people? Well, that's what this is all about. They need to be exposed. Pull the cover off of them so that they can be exposed to the righteous indignation of the people.
We'll come back and finish our conversation on who killed Malcolm X
right after this. That's right. Bring it down.
We're continuing our conversation. You have heard a lot today talked about in reference to Khalil, one of our guests. Stuart, if we could see that slide, please. What I would like to do is show a number for the Committee for Human Justice, a number that you can call if you're concerned about the freedom of this gentleman, 212-581-4493. That's 212-581-4493. Khalil?
Yeah, and that's for the re-examination of my
Case?
conviction, yeah, and the indictment, and we want to reopen a lot of the Freedom of Information Act files that my lawyer was able to get. You have to ask specifically for what you want.
Yes.
These are the kind of things we want to use this. And I also want to
So people
say,
can get information from this number.
right.
Okay.
And I also want to say this. I would like the public to know that there's a major motion movie picture coming out that's going to be introduced maybe next year, or maybe, and it's called Them. It's called The Honorable Elijah Muhammad. It's on the whole nation of Islam from 1934 up to the present day.
Les, you have been very quiet. Is that because you're saving all the good stuff for the book? Or can you tell us what your final thoughts are on it?
Well, I think, obviously, you've gotten a lot of good information there, but I think that, I agree with you, to accuse everybody is to accuse nobody. And I think that names are important. I think details and facts are important. If you're talking about the assassination itself, I think that if you get back down, if there were 3 guns, and if he and the other brother were not on them, then the question is, well, who were on them? And then I think we can deal more specifically with the role that the government played.
But find out who held the guns first.
I think that's a key question.
What about this? The man that held the shotgun, they gave me the star role. He was very dark, short, and had a full beard.
He didn't, well, remember the lady in South Carolina? She made up whoever she wanted. Dr. Muhammad?
I'm sorry to tell you this. I have a copy of the counterintelligence program of the FBI. I think you're in trouble, Bev. As a result of this show, I think they're probably going to investigate your taxes or something. You're in trouble.
Just for bringing up this issue.
That's right. So let's not just open the files under the Freedom of Information Act, because that restricts your access. Let's open up all the files and let the chips fall where they may.
But let's be very clear that, Bev, you may join a list with Lonnie Guinier, with Janetta Cole,
already on
with
the
Benjamin
list.
Chavis, and for our viewers today, they need to ask the question in the political context. It is clear that, as a historian, there are differences between Malcolm and the Nation of Islam, but differences do not translate into a murderous feud. Who benefited from Malcolm and Martin's death? Those are the questions that your viewers have to raise, and we have to demand justice.
Will we have to go to the tomb of J. Edgar Hoover to find out?
No. We've got to go to this government and the people in power in this
How many
country.
presidents?
It's not a question of personalities. It's a question of power and politics. That's the question.
Zach Kondo put it in his book. I think there's a question of accepting head on, what the reality is. I think there were some people who were moved around on this chessboard.
We're out of time. And we just started you talking and we're out of time. Who killed Malcolm X? The truth must come out. That's what this panel says. And in order for it to come out, you have to get involved. Remember that. Until the next time, stand up, be counted. Get involved. God bless.
Mr. O'Connor.
What is your real name?
Malcolm X.
Is that your legal name?
As far as I'm concerned, it's my legal name.
Have you been to court to establish the
I didn't have to go to court to be called Murphy or Jones or Smith. Excuse me for answering you this way.
That's all right.
If a Chinese person were to say his name was Patrick Murphy, you would look at him like he's insane, because Murphy is an Irish name, a European name, or the name that has a Caucasian or white background. And a yellow person, Chinese is a yellow man, and he has nothing to do or no connection whatsoever with the name Murphy. And if it doesn't look proper for a person who is yellow or Chinese to be walking around named Murphy or Jones or Johnson or Bunch or Powell, I think it would be just as improper for a black person or the so-called Negro in this country, as we're taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to walk around with these names. And therefore he teaches us that during slavery, the same slave master who owned us put his last name on us to denote that we were his property. So that when you see a Negro today who's named Johnson, if you go back in his history, you'll find that he was once his grandfather, or one of his forefathers was owned by a white man who was named Johnson. His name is Bunch. His grandfather was owned by a white man that was named Bunch.
Would you mind telling me what your father's last name was?
My father didn't know his last name. My father got his last name from his grandfather, and his grandfather got it from his grandfather, who got it from the slave master. The real names of our people were destroyed during slavery.
Was there any line, any point in the genealogy of your family when you did have to use the last name, and if so, what was it?
The last name of my forefathers was taken from them when they were brought to America and made slaves. And then the name of the slave master was given, which we refuse. We reject that name today.
You mean you won't even tell me what your father's supposed last name was or gifted last name was?
I never acknowledge it whatsoever.
Let me ask you about the status of Elijah Muhammad. First of all, is he ill?
I spoke to him today. He is in better health than he has been. He's suffering from asthmatic bronchitis.
Is that why he didn't attend your rally on last Tuesday?
The only reason that he didn't attend was his ill condition, and the weather here, especially on that particular day, was of such nature that it would have been almost insane for him to come.
Well, now, did you hold that meeting last Tuesday because it coincided with the general election, the primary election?
I think if you study the history of Mr. Muhammad's work and religious work in this country, we've had our convention on February the 26th every year for, I think, the past 33 years.
Well, now, while you don't care to discuss your former name or the name that the slave master gave to your antecedents, it is a matter of record that Muhammad's last name was Poole, Elijah Poole.
No, that's the name that his slave master gave to his grandfather or great-grandfather, but that's not his name.
Well, his mother and father thought when they called him Elijah Poole that was his name.
They didn't know any better.
Well, if they didn't know any better or not, they thought that was his name.
Yes, sir, but sir...
Well, what I'm trying to find out is when did he cease to be Elijah Poole and get to be Elijah Muhammad?
In 1931, I think it was, in Detroit, he was taught the true history of...
That was his name.
They didn't know any better.
Well, if they didn't know any better or not, they thought that was his name.
Yes, sir, but sir...
So what I'm trying to find out is when did he cease to be Elijah Poole and get to be Elijah Muhammad?
In 1931, I think it was, in Detroit, he was taught the true history of our people and made aware at that time that he was wearing an English name, and by not being an Englishman, he looked out of place. And his teacher gave him the name that he's wearing today. Muhammad, Elijah Muhammad.
All right, now when did he become what he purports to be in your literature, the son of Allah?
I've never heard the Honorable Elijah Muhammad referred to as the son of Allah.
The prophet of Allah. Okay.
I've never heard him referred to as the prophet of Allah.
What do you refer to him
Messenger of Allah.
All right, the messenger of Allah, and I appreciate the correction.
Yes, I mean, he says that a prophet is somebody who predicts the future, and he's not predicting the future, whereas a messenger is someone who carries a message that has been given to him by one who authors that message.
Why, now, who gave him the message, and to whom is it supposed to be delivered?
Master W.F. Muhammad, the one who taught him, is the author of the message. He gave it to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, which makes him the messenger. And he's to deliver that message of truth and righteousness to the 20 million American so-called Negroes, which means he's to teach us the truth, which will awaken us, and then show us how to live a life of righteousness, which will automatically qualify us for recognition as human beings by all other righteous human beings here on this earth.
Well, now, one other question. With reference to what Mr. Hurlbut asked you a little bit ago, you took a very moderate position of wanting independence without having any hatred for the whites. Do I understand that correctly?
Hatred is not involved in it whatsoever.
Well, I recall in a recent plane crash, 2 or 3 years ago, or less than that, a charter flight on Air France in which a group of people from Atlanta, Georgia were, as they say in the business, as they took off from Orly Field. And you were quoted at that time as expressing great gratification that this tragedy had occurred. Do you recall that?
I recall it.
What did you say? Do you remember?
The press misinterpreted it and misrepresented it.
What did you say?
They said that it was made at a Muslim meeting. It wasn't. It was made at a rally of Negroes, Baptist, Methodist, Catholic, and otherwise in Los Angeles, who were rallying to protest the brutal shooting of 7 unarmed Negroes.
And what did you
by
say?
Heavily armed white policemen in the city of Los Angeles. And because we are a people who have been taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to never carry weapons of any kind, but to get on God's side and rely on God to fight our battles for us. At the time that these brothers were shot down so brutally, I pointed out at the funeral of the brother who died that God would step in and take a hand in giving us some form of justice for the brutal killing of our brother. And when the plane crashed in France, I pointed out to the crowd at this rally that this was an act of God showing his wrath or complete resentment over the brutal form of injustice that had been inflicted upon our poor unarmed brothers.
Were you saying that, or do you believe that?
At that time, Dr. Billy Graham was in a crusade in Chicago, and the press, your papers here in this city, quoted Billy Graham of also saying that plane crash was an act of God. And if you take time to check the newspapers, I think that you'll find that this is correct. But no one thought that Billy Graham was so wrong when he attributed the crash of this plane to his God. But when we say that it come from our God, then we're looked upon as being, outrageous.
I know, but you took the position that this was a matter of satisfaction to you for an injustice done against you, and I think that that's a trifle severe.
We did not think that it was a coincidence that 120 of the whites on this plane came from the state of Georgia, a state that has the worst record in the history of America for the mistreatment of black people in this country.
Worse than Mississippi?
They maybe are a little less, Mississippi is a little less hypocritical today than Georgia, but both of them are still practicing the same thing. Now the whites in Georgia bite Negroes with a smile, whereas they used to bite them with a growl. But they're still being bitten, and we don't think that it is any worse to be bitten with a smile than it is to be bitten with a growl.
Mr. Calvert.
While we're on the subject of Mississippi, what is your organization's position of what happened in Mississippi in the past 6 months?
Such as what?
Such as the James Meredith incident and the enrollment of him in the university.
Well, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad wants justice for every one of the 20 million so-called Negroes, and to just take one Negro and stick him in college with the aid of 15,000 troops, and at a cost of $6,000, is a disgrace. It's a waste of taxpayers' money. It's a farce. It's hypocrisy. Because if it's right for one Negro to be forced into that university, then every Negro in the state of Mississippi who is qualified has the same right to go to that university. And if the government is not ready and willing to enforce the right of every Negro in the state of Mississippi, then, in my opinion, sir, it's only hypocrisy to pretend that they are for justice by pushing one Negro in and blowing it up all over the world to make it look like they're solving the problem, when millions of black people in that state are still going to segregated schools and getting an inferior education.
Does your organization encourage members to attempt to enter schools that have been known as all white in the past?
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad doesn't discourage us from attending white schools, but he does say that it is better for us to go to our own schools. And after we have a thorough knowledge of ourselves, of our own kind, and racial dignity has been instilled within us, then we can go to anyone's school and we'll still retain our race pride, our racial dignity, and we will be able to avoid the subservient inferiority complex that most Negroes have, or that is instilled within most Negroes who receive this sort of integrated education.
You were born in Omaha, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And your family left Omaha when you were, what, 1 year old?
I imagine about a year old.
And why did they leave Omaha?
Well, to my understanding, the Ku Klux Klan burned down one of their homes in Omaha.
This made your family feel very unhappy, I'm sure.
Well, insecure, if not unhappy.
So you must have a somewhat prejudiced point of view, a personally prejudiced point of view. In other words, you cannot look at this in a broad academic sort of way, really.
I think that's incorrect, because despite the fact that happened in Omaha, and then when we moved to Lansing, Michigan, our home was burned down again. In fact, my father was killed by the Ku Klux Klan. And despite all of that, no one was more thoroughly integrated with whites than I. No one has lived more so in the society of whites than I. And it was only until I became a Muslim that I ceased living in the society of whites.
You say you were thoroughly integrated with the whites, Malcolm. Yes. Do you have white people in your family background?
Definitely. Most Negroes in this country have whites in their family background. Because
how are you going to differentiate between the white blood that's in you and the Negro blood that's in you? And you don't mind my using the term Negro because you use this yourself.
I use it interchangeably.
I know you do. Why do you do that?
Well, I use it if it fits the purpose to use it, but I use it against my will.
But you used it voluntarily in describing the incident in Los Angeles.
Still, I use it against my will.
I guess the teachings weren't thoroughly inculcated.
No, but when I say to you that the cops in Los Angeles shot down 7 unarmed Negroes, every Negro in the audience knows what I'm talking about. But when I say that they shot 7 Muslims, then a lot of the Negroes don't realize that you're
you said 7 colored people, because you say you used the term colored people. You said...
I don't think I used the word colored on this program.
Yes, you did. You did when we
started. Not colored.
I think so. Black people, I'm sorry. You did say black.
Well, we can use black, and that fits everybody.
Okay.
But, sir, the black...
Now, let me get back to another point that you made. You said that you go back home. Now, what do you mean by back home?
I've only heard the Honorable Elijah Muhammad say back among our own people. From
You
whence
said
we,
back home. You don't mind my saying.
Right, back home. But by that he means...
Do you mean back into the roots of Islam, or do you mean back to Africa?
Back home. And by back home he means back into our original civilization. And if you study history, the Islamic culture existed in West Africa,
But your
Central
family
Africa.
didn't come from an Islamic background originally, did it? I mean, you came from the proud tribes of Africa, which is
I think you'll find, sir, that one of that Islam, the Islamic culture,
I agree, there is.
existed widely in Africa, Central Africa, West Africa.
I agree. I've met many people in there. Mr. O'Connor.
With regard to that tragedy out there in Los Angeles, I myself refer to it when it happened as the tragic police action, so I am not totally biased.
Thank you, sir.
Coming from Muhammad Speaks, which is the publication of your cult or your religion, Elijah Muhammad referred to the policemen out there, the white policemen, as devils. He said, "There is no justice here for us black people. There is no future for us nor our children in civilized America." Doesn't that imply that you're going to get out, or that's his wish that you get out?
If he referred to those policemen out there as devils, who were heavily armed and knew that the Negroes whom they were shooting down in cold blood were not heavily armed, I don't think that those policemen themselves would deny that they're devils, nor would any Negro who witnessed such a deed deny that they are devils.
Well, about the other part of it, there's no justice here for us black people. There is no future for us nor our children in civilized America. And I didn't make that up. He said it in his own
And he's correct in what he says, sir.
Well, what does it mean? Does it mean you're going to get out, or
It means the same thing that Attorney General Robert Kennedy means when he says that the number one domestic problem in America is the race problem. That it is almost impossible to solve it. It's almost impossible to give justice to Negroes.
What has been the growth of the Muslim movement? There are conflicting reports as to how many Muslims there are in the United States. Can you tell us?
Well, most critics say that the dissatisfied follow Muhammad, that the unemployed and the oppressed follow Muhammad. And I think you'll agree, the sociologists, the economists, and other experts say that the masses of black people are dissatisfied, unemployed, oppressed, and fed up. So that he actually gets his support at the mass level. But now you have other Negroes at the class level who pretend not to go for him, because usually their job has been given to them by the white man. They have positions to which they have been appointed, and they think that the only way that they can protect their job is by pretending in front of the white man that they don't go for Mr. Muhammad either. But you find
how many Muslims do you say there are in numbers?
I couldn't say. I've never heard him say, and he's the only one who would know.
500,000?
I couldn't say. I think that anyone who does say is not in a position to know, and anyone who knows wouldn't say.
What do you think that the Urban League and the NAACP have accomplished for your people? What's your attitude
toward
them?
In their own way, they have been doing their best to bring about freedom, justice, and equality and human dignity for the black people in this country. But today you have such an intense degree of dissatisfaction and impatience existing among our people at the mass level that it is almost impossible to come to them with a program that's going to take another 100 years to solve their problem, and they still be satisfied to wait. So that they have, the Urban League and the NAACP has done a good job within their understanding. But today it takes more immediate solutions. And the solution that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has is immediate. It's more practical.
You think they're not moving fast enough?
Well, they're moving as fast as they can. But that's not fast enough for the masses of black people. If a person is sitting on a warm stove and you get ready to let him up, no matter how slow you are, he has patience because it's only warm. But the masses of black people who are sitting on a hot stove, they're impatient. And no matter how fast you say progress is being made toward letting them up, that progress is not fast enough for them.
Well, the NAACP and the Urban League have both been critical of the Muslims.
The NAACP and Urban League have been maneuvered into criticizing us against their own will. Usually the divide and conquer tactics have always been used by the oppressor to keep the oppressed oppressed. And the NAACP has been used against the Muslims. Efforts have been made to use us against them. But the Honorable Elijah Muhammad says he'll work with the NAACP, the Urban League, and any other Negro organization that wants to uplift the black man as long as it doesn't conflict with our religious principles.
Well, I remember once when Elijah was quoted as having said that the Urban League and the NAACP sold out to the white man. Has he ever made that statement
to my knowledge, I don't think that he has said that they sold out to the white man. I've heard him say that.
Is that his feeling?
The NAACP has been in existence for 54 years. And they elect a new national president every year. And they have never elected a black man to sit in that capacity. Arthur Spingarn has been president of the NAACP for 24 years. And so in this sense, it means that either they're practicing the same discrimination that they accuse the white man of practicing, they're practicing it themselves, or else they're not qualifying other Negroes in that organization for the positions of leadership. This is our only criticism.
You personally feel that they have sold out to the white man? You personally feel that those organizations have sold out to the white man?
I don't think that they would knowingly allow themselves to be used or misused against their own people. So if they are failing to do the job that our people expect of them, probably it's just through lack of understanding. But today their understanding is increasing, and you'll find that they're developing a better ability to work with all different factions for the betterment of our people.
Malcolm, how do you yourself feel about the white man?
I believe that the white man has done a great injustice to the black man in this country by having kidnapped our people and brought us here and down to the level that we're on today. And today, instead of approaching the factors that their original mistake has created, instead of approaching these factors objectively and realistically, the greatest sin that they're doing now is trying to pretend that they never committed a crime, that they never did any wrong. And when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad points out the injustices that our people are suffering, they make that sin worse by accusing him of teaching hate, or by accusing him of black supremacy, or by accusing him of advocating violence, simply because he is pointing out the real factors in the problem.
We have a little time left. You don't have to hurry so much, Malcolm.